Supervisor Walkinshaw, if you're on the line and you can hear us, we'd be happy to hear from you and to kick us off for tonight's discussion on the Braddock District. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Graham and Ryan and Michael for pulling this together this evening, and I'll be very brief because we have a lot to get through. Ryan is going to give an overview of the SSPA process, so I won't do that. I'll just note that this is a process kind of new and improved and revamped, I think, from the Board of Supervisors. And the goal is to give anyone in the community the opportunity to propose changes or amendments to the comprehensive plan. But also, very importantly, what we're trying to do here tonight is give the community an active role in shaping that plan and participating in the consideration of those nominated changes. And as Graham noted, we had only 3 nominations in the Braddock District that we'll be looking at tonight. And I think just an important note, the fact that we are discussing 3 nominations tonight is not an indication that I or Fairfax County are necessarily supporting or advocating for any of these 3 nominations. As I noted, the SSPA process gives anyone, and with the consent of a property owner, the right to put forward a nomination and have a fair hearing and a fair process for that nomination. So my role and the staff's role is to make sure that happens, that there's a fair process to consider the nominations, and of course that the community gets to provide their input and consideration throughout. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight and being a part of that process. And I'll turn it back over to you, Graham, to get us started.
Thank you, Supervisor Walkinshaw. I really appreciate those words. And I also wanted to note that Planning Commissioner Mary Cortina is also in the call. She was very, involved in the retrospective that took place on the process that Supervisor Walkinshaw alluded to, kind of the newer and improved SSPA process. So Commissioner Cortina, before we get started, did you want to say anything to kind of kick us off as well?
Sure. Thank you, Graham. I appreciate that you're having a community meeting. The SSPA has taken various different forms over time, and this is the latest iteration. And I don't believe we've had a community meeting this early in the process before. So if there are comments and suggestions as we go through this, we're always happy to hear about the process as well as the individual properties. So thanks everyone for being part of this. The comprehensive plan is the community's plan, and you're part of a voice in that. So with that, Graham, I'll go right ahead.
All right, well, thank you. And I'm going to pass the proverbial baton over to Ryan Stewart, also with Department of Planning and Development. Ryan, most of y'all are probably know Ryan at this point if you've been involved in Braddock District land use planning over the past couple of years, but he's working on a number of initiatives, not just related to SSPA, that especially in the Fairfax Center area. So he's an expert in this area of the county, and I think most of y'all are going to recognize him and know him from other initiatives. So Ryan, I'll kick it over to you for the presentation on kind of the comprehensive planning 101.
Okay, great. Thank you, Graham. And also thank you, Supervisor Walkinshaw and Commissioner Cortina, for those opening remarks. I do know that looking at the agenda here, we do have these 3 nominations here in the Braddock District. In light of who is on the call and where we think the most community involvement is right now, we would like to move the 3rd item, the trustees of the Church of the Good Shepherd, Episcopal in Burke. We'd like to move that to the first application that we review. In that sense, for those of you that are interested in participating, we can go ahead and do that up front after I provide a brief overview of comprehensive planning and our process to date. That will hopefully allow us time to be able to discuss that application, answer any questions that you might have, and then we'll move on to applications 1 and 2, which are in the Fairfax Center area. But just to get started here, what we first want to do is provide a overview of the comprehensive plan, kind of get everyone on the same page of what comprehensive planning is and how it's used in Fairfax County. So the comprehensive plan is required for every locality in the state of Virginia. And the real purpose here is to provide a holistic vision for what the county should develop as. And it also helps planners and decision makers in the public plan for future growth and change. It's a multi-layered document that includes both policy goals at the high level and objectives, but it also as well as physical planning of land uses and related infrastructure over the next 15, 20, 25 years as a typical planning horizon. Our plan here in Fairfax County provides recommendations for how land could be used in the future and how and where future growth can be accommodated. And it also includes provisions for the protection of the environment and cultural resources, as well as other planning elements. The comprehensive plan, I should note, is not a regulatory document. It's simply a guidance document that informs land use decision making. But it is used by both the county staff and our elected officials to guide land use decisions across the communities of Fairfax County. And then these suggestions and guidance would be implemented by the county's zoning ordinance or other regulations. So the different elements of the comprehensive plan include the policy plan, which is the high-level land use policies and guidance that applies to every land area within Fairfax County. But then broken up by geography are area plans, which provide specific land use guidance for individual areas of the county. And these include both kind of regional guidance as well as any site-specific recommendations that may be at the small area level or even the parcel level. This SSPA process is intended to address the plan amendments at that site-specific level. And so we're not looking at larger policy concerns per se with the site-specific plan amendments, but we're looking at small areas and we're looking at individual parcels. And then in addition to the area plans, if you peruse the comprehensive plan, you'll see that this is supplemented by a series of maps and a series of graphical representations that help with implementation. So going on to the next slide here, one of the key elements of the comprehensive plan is the concept for future development. And essentially, this is the part of our area plans where you can see here it's demonstrated by the slide here, and I've highlighted the two areas of the county where our 3 nominations within the Braddock district are occurring. But the concept of future development provides basically a framework for development. And it basically serves as the best overall resource for understanding where most of our future growth is envisioned within the county. Each land use classification represented on this map is associated with its own recommendations for how each of these areas should develop over time. Suburban neighborhoods and low-density residential areas are envisioned for little to no change within the county, while almost all future growth in the county is planned to occur within designated mixed-use centers. These are our areas such as the Tyson's Urban Center, various transit station areas, community business centers, and suburban centers. And that latter category I'll discuss a little bit more in detail because 2 of our nominations are within the Fairfax Center suburban center area, shown there in the western portion of the map in purple. And this is a character where we would have a focus on mixed-use development and more of a dense development pattern than you may find in other areas of the county. So moving on, just to briefly highlight the 2023 site-specific plan amendment process. This is a new process, as Graham mentioned earlier on, where in the past we've had various means of amending the comprehensive plan, site-specific plan amendment being one of them. But this is really a process where anyone in the county, if you're a landowner, you're able to submit a proposal for a change to the plan. It's intended specifically for individual properties or a cluster of properties in a small area, as I mentioned. So the focus is on those small areas rather than the larger area-wide guidance that we would typically handle through a larger area-wide study. The process was also designed to allow community members the opportunity to provide input on the nominations prior to any decision being made as to whether or not these should be authorized for a full study and a potential plan amendment. So then the purpose of this meeting, and thank you again for all of you who are participating, is that we are hoping to get your feedback and your initial comments and concerns on the nominations as they've been submitted. So where we are in the process, in his initial comments, Graham mentioned that we are at the very start of the process, and this is just, as you can see here, we are at the very beginning stage. This is at the proposal stage where we have initial nominations have been submitted from community members, and we are in a screening phase. And so, no decision has been made whether or not to fully evaluate these or whether to move them into a more formal comprehensive plan amendment. At this stage in the game, we are gathering initial community input. If a nomination is chosen to move forward by the Board of Supervisors, it's then placed in our comprehensive planning work program. It's then scheduled for a full evaluation as part of a plan amendment, and then but that's only after that action as a plan amendment is authorized by the Board of Supervisors. Once that happens, there's some additional review that takes place. We would go through a full analysis on whether or not a particular plan amendment makes sense as proposed. But any plan amendment that would be authorized for further study would then have to be evaluated and approved by the Board of Supervisors before being implemented into the comprehensive plan. Following any comprehensive plan amendment is the time where we would look at the specifics of the rezoning application. Again, the comprehensive plan is an advisory document. The rezoning application is really where we would get into the details of how a particular site or how a particular land use is regulated. We would go through that rezoning process, and then once that is complete, a parcel or an area of property would be considered to be having an entitlement that would allow the future development to take place. Following there, we would have site review where the plan is refined into a further, more detailed plan for development. And we would have the construction, which would include everything from the issuing of building permits to the actual construction of any facilities or any buildings, and then occupancy of the building itself once the entire process is complete. And so, again, we are just at the beginning of this whole process with the proposal, and there are many, many opportunities for the public to be involved and for the public to provide feedback in each of these stages. But let's move on. Let's talk about where we are in the screening phase. We've used this term throughout the presentation now. And it's rather a new phrase for us here in the SSPA process as we're using this new process in 2023. But each of the nominations we're discussing today has already been vetted for general eligibility and completeness during the nomination and acceptance phase of the SSPA process. That's not to say that each phase or I should say each nomination is complete, in the sense of, we will be continuing to ask for additional information, continuing to get clarity on specific issues. There may be other specific types of studies that may be provided as part of either the rezoning process or at a later date. But in terms of completeness, what we mean by this is that it's met the general, very broad criteria for being accepted for consideration as part of a screened nomination. During this phase is when we look at how each nomination is reviewed for consistency with county policies and priorities. Any important issues that are identified that kind of rise to the surface in that initial review. And then we also want to prioritize these nominations to determine which of these to include on a future comprehensive plan work amendment or a work program in the coming year. Noting that we do have limited resources for taking on the work program. We want to really provide for those that provide the greatest benefit and which ones really have the best merit of moving forward. So as I mentioned, this is an opportunity for providing your input and your feedback. So, this is what we're really holding these community meetings for, is to help us evaluate the merits of each nomination, help us identify any critical issues, and to begin thinking about the prioritization of potential plan amendments and studies. So, as we open this up for feedback on each of these nominations, please know that all feedback is welcome. So I encourage anyone who has a question or comment or concern to please let us know. You can see here kind of some examples of the types of questions that are always helpful, but any and all feedback that you're willing to give is going to help us out in this process. So we thank you for that. So what happens next? After this series of community meetings, The screening phase will culminate with a series of Planning Commission workshops at which the feedback received at the community meetings will be considered, and then any staff analysis and any nominator input that we've received to date. And then a recommendation will be developed by the Planning Commission for the Board of Supervisors on which nominations will ultimately be included on a future comprehensive plan amendment work program. As I mentioned, this is where the Board of Supervisors would authorize any future study, any individual plan amendments, and then it kind of sets the work schedule and the staff's guidance over the coming years for which studies to undertake. Now, on your right-hand side of your screen here, we've listed some key dates of when those Planning Commission workshops are tentatively scheduled. We are still working on this agenda and on this series of workshops, but here's what we currently have them scheduled for, and we may adjust that schedule as needed, but just to give you an idea for the timeline. So what happens if a nomination is reviewed and selected to move forward, and then it becomes an actual plan amendment? So if it's selected to move forward, it will be added to the plan amendment work program as previously mentioned. Subsequently, staff will support the board in prioritizing plan amendments on the work program. If there are proposed amendments, for example, that strongly align with county objectives or initiatives, they may be evaluated sooner than other proposed amendments. This prioritization may also include evaluating items already on the work program in terms of prioritization. And so, it should be noted that this timeline for considering a proposed addition to the work plan, it's going to vary. But regardless of the timing, we'll continue to coordinate with local stakeholders regarding the public engagement process. And so, as we mentioned, this is but one touch point for the community to provide feedback and provide their questions and concerns.
Brian, before you move
Yes.
any further, we're getting a little bit of interference from a couple of the people that are calling in. If you all could, especially those that are calling in by phone, if you could mute yourselves for the time being, that would be really helpful so we get the best quality for everybody. But make sure that when as a caller, if you do want to speak during the time when we're going to have Q&A, just make sure that you do come off mute so that we can hear you, and we'll be happy to call on you. Thank you.
I'll also use this quick break here just to mention that as I'm presenting, I can't see who might be raising hands or having questions in the chat. So if you have these questions, please feel free to either utilize the chat or raise your hand. We will have a question and comment period here coming up, and we'll be able to moderate what's in that chat box, and so we'll be able to answer any questions you might have. But for the time being, I can't see exactly where those are coming from, but we'll be sure to moderate those and capture those. So if a nomination is not selected to move forward for further review, it's removed from consideration and won't be added to the plan amendment work program. It should be noted, however, that a property not considered for further plan amendment review could potentially be redeveloped under the existing comprehensive plan recommendation and or its existing zoning approvals. So that doesn't preclude a nomination from developing in another fashion or still pursuing a rezoning application or re-entitlement based on what the current comprehensive plan recommends. And additionally, a proposal removed from consideration could be resubmitted in a future SSPA review cycle. However, if that's to be the case, anything that's resubmitted would need to demonstrate a change in how this proposal has changed, or any justification as far as why that nomination should be reconsidered. So you can hear several terms here as we discuss these nominations, and so I just have just a brief mention of some things here just to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language, so to speak, as we go through this, to make sure that everyone understands how these are being presented. The first concept, these are basically around density, intensity, and FAR, that's floor to area ratio. But these are all terms that we use here in planning to discuss how much development is allowed in a given area or in a given parcel. So as I mentioned, you'll hear more about this later, but to talk about kind of to put this in context, here are some examples of what residential density and how it is measured. Typically, we see this measured in dwelling units per acre, and so you would have a given property of a certain number of acres, and then the density guidelines would determine how many particular living units would be allowed or would be suitable for a given property. So at the very low end of the spectrum, we would have, what you may know of as single family detached homes. These are your single family homes. These would be, anywhere from 1 to 2 to 4 dwelling units per acre. You start getting into some medium densities when you start looking at townhomes and attached single family homes. These could be anywhere from about 12 dwelling units per acre to 16 units per acre once you start stacking them into kind of a 2/2 configuration. And you can kind of see in those two images what those might look like. And many of you may be already familiar with some of these forms, but on the higher end of the intensity or the density spectrum, I should say, we have mid-rise residential, which is where you might see this would be in a more mixed use context, where you've got a series of retail establishments over housing on the upper levels. This particular example is about 63 dwelling units per acre, and then the mid-rise multifamily, which would be your apartment building or your higher densities there. That's about 72 dwelling units per acre. And so, not to say that any one of these is good or bad, but it all depends on the context in which the application is or the nomination is proposing. And so this is just in terms of the types of density that we're looking at. These would be the typical measurements that you might be able to use to compare one density to another. So another term that we use is intensity, and this is typically used for non-residential or mixed-use developments, as I mentioned. A floor-to-area ratio, or FAR, as the acronym is obtained by dividing the entire floor area of a building by the land area of the parcel. So, for example, here we have a 1.0 FAR, which is you have just as much floor area as you would the size of the parcel. And so that can occur in several different configurations. This particular graphic here is showing a 4-story building that is, contains the same amount of square footage as the parcel, but it's configured to have 4 stories, and so it's only actually taking up about 1/4 of the parcel itself. And so you can imagine different scenarios where we might have, in a high density area, we may have like a 2 FAR, a 3 FAR, or in the lower area densities, and you may see anything ranging from, say, on a mixed use perspective, anything from like a 0.35 to 0.5, 1.0. And so this is, it's a concept where it's basically a comparison of the size of the developable parcel with the floor area of the proposed development. And I should mention that, in most cases, this would be calculated not considering the things that are already accounted for, such as roads, such as resource protection areas, such as areas that have already been deemed not suitable for development. And so, looking at non-residential intensity, some of these examples, I mentioned kind of the difference between low and high. You can see here like a 0.25 FAR. An example of this might be your auto-oriented retail, which we see in a lot of our suburban areas. Going kind of toward the right here, a medium intensity might be a 1.0 FAR, which is typical of a mixed-use village center, like what you might see in the Braddock district in an area such as the Fairfax Center area, Fairfax Corner, where you have the movie theater, places like this where you've got a mixture of retail and a mixture of commercial and a mixture of residential, all occupying the same general development footprint. And then high intensity is typical in our more transit-oriented development areas, such as, I used Tyson's as an earlier example. This is where we really start to see the increased intensity of higher development potentials, taller buildings, much more compact and urban style development patterns. So I've given a lot of background on kind of the comprehensive planning process, the SSPA processes, and some of our terms, but let's go ahead and we'll move into the nominations. Here in the Braddock district, we're looking at 3 nominations. We've got number 1, which is Evergreen Investment Company at the corner of Waples Mill Road and Route 50. You can see this is in the western part of the district. We've got SP 002, which is EQR Fairfax Corner, located just east of the Fairfax Corner development. If you're familiar with where the Fairfax County Government Center is, this property is just to the north of the Fairfax County Government Center. And thirdly, in the center of the district, we've got the trustees of the Church of the Good Shepherd Episcopal in Burke. This is at the corner of Ollie Lane and Braddock Road. And in terms of how we look at each of these nominations, I understand mentioned earlier, we're going to look at the church nomination first. And for those of you that this is your only application where you've signed in for us tonight, feel free to you can feel free to drop off the call once your questions and concerns have been answered, or you can feel free to stick around and learn about the other two applications as well. So in looking at the area of where the church property is located, this is in the Braddock community planning sector of the Fairfax Planning District, which is the geographical designation within the comprehensive plan. And you can see here in this map is showing the community planning sector and its boundaries. So to get your bearings, it's bounded by Braddock Road to the south. You've got Ollie Lane to the east. You've got Roberts Road to the west. And you've got Guinea Road there along the east as well. Each of these, you can see how the sector itself is broken down into a series of numbered recommendations, and each of these corresponds with a land use recommendation that's in the text. In particular for this application, number 5 is what we're looking at, which is the Ollie Lane corridor, which according to our current comprehensive plan guidance has been planned for lower densities at a development intensity of approximately 1 dwelling unit per acre along much of the southern portion of that corridor. So the nomination itself, I mentioned here, it's located at the corner of Braddock Road and Ollie Lane. It's on approximately 10.3 acres. It's in the community planning sector, Braddock. And the adopted plan, again, mentions the 1 dwelling unit per acre as a cap for potential development on each of these sites. This nomination from the trustees of the Church of the Good Shepherd would be for residential use at approximately 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre. This would accommodate approximately 8 single-family homes on the northern about 3 acres of the property, and then the church property itself would remain. So with this particular nomination, in what this might look like, and we do have the nominator here, and they're going to provide their own presentation of what's being nominated. But just to give you a quick idea here, you can see the church would remain in the southern portion of the property, and then the northern portion of the property would be sold to a developer and then subdivided to result in approximately 8 single-family house lots. And I'll let the nominator speak to that in greater detail. But some of the things that we've noted in the preliminary staff considerations for this application is that we had a similar proposal back in the 2005 annual plan review process. Annual plan review was the process that superseded the SSPA process, where we similar process for amending the comprehensive plan. In this case, this particular nomination it was very similar to what's currently being proposed, although this nomination would be proposing less intensity on the church portion of the property and slightly more intensity on the northern portion of the property. But for most intents and purposes, it's a similar development proposal. Some of the things that the staff and the task force noted before the nomination was withdrawn back in 2005 was there was some concern about mitigating impacts to the surrounding single-family homes. The compatibility with the plan recommendations along the Ollie Lane corridor. Again, I mentioned the 1 dwelling unit per acre provision in the plan. There was some concerns over how the site was going to be accessed and some transportation concerns along Ollie Lane. And then also the retention of the site's tree canopy and vegetation and how that serves to buffer the uses on site from the residential neighborhoods. And so, just based on a cursory review, we see some of these similar issues given the similarity of this application with the one that was submitted in 2005. But again, I will let the nominator speak more to the specific details of this application. And with that in mind, I'd like to go ahead and we can turn this over to the applicant for their presentation. We have Lynn Strobel, I believe, on the line, as well as
Yes.
Kelly Persistny, her planner. And Lynn, I'm not sure if you want me to advance the slides or if you'd like to do that, but I'm available to do whatever you find most convenient.
Either way, I know that Kelly, I think it's ready to put it up, or if you would like to, either way is fine.
Yeah, I will go ahead. I'm going to stop presenting, and I will let Kelly take over this portion just to give her the flexibility to present these as she wishes to. And then
Right.
after we've had the presentation from the applicant, we'll open it up for some community comments. And so with that, I'll go ahead and Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, I'll go ahead and take it. So my name is Lynn Strobel with the law firm of Walsh Colucci, and I'm representing the church. I also want to introduce John Morris, who I have been working with and who is a church trustee. At the end of my presentation, I am going to recognize John to see if he would like to add anything to the presentation. So if we go to the first slide, I just want to point out a couple of things. This is the zoning map of Fairfax County. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it shows the zoning of the church parcel, which is zoned R1. And as was mentioned by Ryan, it's planned for up to 1 dwelling unit per acre. However, you may be able to see on this map that all of these surrounding parcels primarily are zoned to a higher district. So if you look to the east, that is zoned R3, residential neighborhood, and across Ollie Lane, it's PDH3. Now, both of those residential zoning classifications allow up to 3 dwelling units per acre. There are a couple of parcels in the area that are zoned R1, but you can see that predominantly it's R2, R3. There's PDH3, as I said, across Ollie and also across Braddock Road, which is interestingly enough developed with townhomes, but that is part of a larger development, and they put more intensity along Braddock Road. So Kelly, if we go to the next slide, I think that there has been maybe a little bit of confusion or misinformation about the church's intent here with this plan nomination. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background. The Church of the Good Shepherd was established in 1969. It moved from another location nearby. And I did not find this out until recently, but the church was originally established, and it was in the Braddock district in 1884. And so it moved to this property in 1969. The church was constructed well before the homes around it. It is really the foundation of the community, and it's going to remain a part of the community. So the church has been there for a good long time. The church owns about 10 acres, and it contemplates the sale of only a portion of the property. So I think that there may have been some rumor circulating that the entirety of the property would be sold, that the church was in some sort of financial constraints, but it is not. It only contemplates the sale of about 3 acres to support its missions. And the property that it is selling, you may recall, if you've lived in the neighborhood for a while, called the Dove property, that was right there farthest to the north of the church. So the church property is subject to a special permit. One thing that's interesting is that because the church was established in 1969, that was before requirements for special permits or special exceptions. So it was established on the property before that requirement. But it did come through a special permit process because it wanted to add to what was then its existing improvements. There were 3 phases of development. There was phase 1, which was the fellowship hall that has been constructed. That includes on the first floor some offices and classrooms. Phase 2 is a new sanctuary that has not been developed. And phase 3 was the Dove property on the northern end that was approved for an athletic field. Because at that time, and this was a number of years ago, the thought was that would be a good use for the church, and perhaps also for the community. If the church goes forward to sell a portion of its property, it does have to go through a special permit amendment. So that would be a process to divide the property. There would have to be a subdivision, but that is a part of the process that we would have to go through. And just to be very clear here, as Ryan was talking about, an amendment to the comprehensive plan is a first step. An amendment to the comprehensive plan does not change the property's zoning. So even if the plan is changed, the zoning will remain R1. When you go through a rezoning, that is a detailed public process. It is during that process that things would be, worked through with the community. So there would be, proposals perhaps for tree preservation area. There would also be discussion of perhaps enhanced stormwater management. That would occur during the rezoning process. I also wanted to note that a lot of the Dove property today is not wooded. It is wooded around the periphery, but not completely vegetated. So if we could go to the next slide, Kelly, and I thought it would be good to come back yes, thank you. That's it. I thought it would be good to come back to that zoning map, just because I want to reiterate that the plan amendment is proposing a density of 2 to 3 dwelling units per acre. They are not suggesting a density that is greater than what surrounds it. I took a look at some of the immediate neighbors. The property to the east that you see is zoned R3. Those homes were built in and around 1977. Their density is 2.89 dwelling units per acre. I know that Ryan was talking about density and what that means. So they're single family detached homes at about 2.89. The property across Braddock Road is zoned PDH3 or planned development housing up to 3 dwelling units per acre. Those were built in about 1999. I think the density there, I couldn't read it very well on the map. I think it's a little over 2 dwelling units per acre, but they preserved a large area of open space. So the size of the lots are actually smaller than the typical R3 lots to the east. Just pointing out that all of this development came in after the church was constructed and established on the property. And again, the proposal would not be requesting anything greater in the way of density than what surrounds it. And that's why we think it is appropriate and would complement the area. So we'll go to the next slide, which is just an aerial. I thought it was helpful just to show the surrounding development. What you see are a number of single-family detached homes. What is proposed, should it go to a rezoning, would be compatible in lot sizes to what surrounds it. And if we go to the last slide, as was mentioned, that we did prepare a concept plan. This was a requirement to submit an amendment in the SSPA process. So this was a requirement to show how the property may, not how it will, but how it may develop if the property owner or a subsequent owner proceeds through a rezoning. And again, to get to this point, you would have to go through a rezoning application. I just want to point out that the density proposed on this plan for that residential piece is about 2.56 dwelling units per acre. Now, this is less than the property to the east. I would note you may see kind of a buffer there along the back. I believe that property is within a conservation easement. That would remain. So I think that there would be protections for the adjacent neighbors. And it would be less intense than that neighborhood to the east. So I wanted to explain those things. I think that the proposal that's before the county and before this group is for something that would be compatible with the area. And I think that the church is just looking to be treated as how other properties were treated that surrounds it. It's really kind of, what would be fair and looking at fairness. With that, I would like to recognize John Morris to see if he would like to add anything to this presentation. John?
Yes, thank you, Lynn. As Lynn mentioned, I am a trustee of the Church of the Good Shepherd, as duly authorized to speak on behalf of the church by the canons of the Episcopal Church of the Diocese and by the Circuit Courts of Fairfax County. Let me say that Church of the Good Shepherd is strong and vibrant. We've met all of our financial obligations for all the years I've been a member, since the early 1990s. This past year, we even upgraded our older preschool classrooms and reshingled our roofs, both projects costing over $228,000. We would not have expended these monies if the church was hurting financially. Since relocating to Ollie and Braddock in 1969, we've grown as the neighborhoods have grown. In 1999, the church acquired additional property along Ollie Lane adjacent to the church as a hedge to future development. This is the approximate 3 acres being discussed this evening. In 2006, Good Shepherd built an addition, doubling our working footprint. The additional 3 acres on Ollie was included in the developmental plan, but changing demographics in the Twin Brook area the past 20 years have modified the church's intention for using that property. In our current long-range vision, the property in question is in excess and not functionally usable for the church mission. Good Shepherd is asking that this residential plot, on which presently sits a home built in the 1960s and on which we've been paying real estate taxes to Fairfax County, that this residential land be treated the same as the surrounding neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods in which many of you have prospered and enjoyed the past 20 years, and some of you up to 50 years. Good Shepherd is your neighbor. It's an asset to the Braddock district. We've never precluded any of you from using our property to walk your dogs, to walk your children, to use the church's playground, to ride bikes, even to teach your kids to drive or to meditate in our memorial garden. Good Shepherd will continue to be your neighbor and an outward supporter for the Braddock district, well past the lives of many of us in this discussion. I appreciate Ryan taking the minute here, and thank you, Lynn, for allowing me to be a part of the discussion.
So thank you. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Can you start with the chat? There's a number of questions that have already been proposed.
Great. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, John. At this time, we're going to go ahead and we're going to open it up for community questions. And just because we do have other applications to discuss tonight, although I'm not anticipating too much discussion on these based on membership in the chat today. But let's just if we could maybe it's 7:45 now. If we could hopefully wrap up any discussion on these by around 8:30 or so, that will give us time to discuss the other two applications in a timely manner tonight. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and we can start with some of the chat questions. I don't know if Graham, you would like to moderate these, or I would like to moderate these. I know some of these have already been followed on, and I'm just catching up. But maybe we'll start with Devin Andrews' question here says, well, let's see, actually, let's go farther up here. Let's start at the beginning, just in the issue of in being fair here. Let's see. Matt Lynch says, thank you for providing a clear and comprehensive explanation of the process. We certainly appreciate your willingness to engage early on in the process for these applications. Great. Thank you, Matt. We appreciate that feedback. To Ron Murray's question on how long is the average time of the comprehensive plan process, I had responded in the chat, but just to reiterate, my response was that it really depends on the length, and the length of time really depends on the complexity of the amendment and the proposal and how long it would take to evaluate what is being proposed and form the appropriate outreach to the community. But typically, we're looking for a site-specific, fairly simple amendment being about 6 to 9 months or so. Now, if we look at a larger area where we would expand this to look at several different sites in conjunction, we would expect that to be more complex, and we would expect that to take a bit longer. But for a simple site-specific amendment, about 6 to 9 months.
And Ryan, one thing to
Yes.
just reiterate is that is dependent on a number of factors, including the outreach model that's used during the plan amendment stage. And it also does not include the zoning stage, which Ms. Strobel indicated, unless, a proposal is run concurrently. So this meeting that we're doing tonight, screening, is the very, very beginning. This stage takes about 5 months, and then that plus the 6 to 9 months that Ryan indicated in the chat. So just want to reiterate, we've said it a couple of times, but this is the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so the comments that we received tonight are going to help, shape the proposal if it does move forward. So thank you for that question. It's a good one. But it's, I was reiterate, this is the very beginning. We're not approving anything in the foreseeable future with this or any of the nominations that we're receiving across the county. So early opportunity to provide feedback.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Graham. I appreciate the clarification there. I think that's very helpful. Andrew, Devin Andrew states that the aerial shows that the wooded back area would be removed in the plan. I don't know, maybe Lynn or perhaps
Sure.
Lynn might be able to advise what the intent there is.
Sure, I'd be happy to answer that. The plan that we shared, the concept does not have limits of clearing and grading on it. All it shows is a lot layout. So it does not anticipate removal of trees, placement of houses, or any of those things. So that is just a concept plan to identify how many lots could potentially be developed on the property.
This is Devin Andrew. Can you tell me if there's any way to preserve that space, that we would have any guarantee that that wooded area would remain?
Well, that would be something that would be discussed during a rezoning application. Those types of details would have to be addressed during a rezoning.
And Lynn, this is John. Just to amplify that, that particular the boundary of the church around those residential neighborhoods is governed by the language contained in the conservation easement.
That is
the
true.
Deed of consolidation, dedication, and easement dated back in January of 2005. So we're part of that 35 feet of buffer zone against the residential property lines is already contained in that deed. And if there's any change to be made to that, that would be a process in the future that would have to be addressed by the county and whoever might want to develop the land. The buffer that the church would still, the church would still have its own buffer as required by the deed around its part of the property.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lynn, for the explanation there. Barbara Crabb mentions, how does the new proposal mitigate the previous concerns? I'm assuming you mean the concerns that I mentioned with the 2005 APR process. I can say at this early stage of nominations, we really have not gotten into those specific details. If this were to be forwarded on for a more in-depth screening, and it does turn into its own plan amendment process, that would be the appropriate time to really look at those details at a level where we would be able to make a more informed and educated recommendation on that. But I don't know if Lynn, if you've got anything you'd like to add to that, or
I don't think so. I think you're absolutely right that we would look at that should this continue to go forward in the process.
And one more thing that I'll indicate on this. So APR in the past did not have what we're doing now, which is called screening. And so some of the things that you would see in terms of comparing older processes and older nominations compared to what we're doing today, it's a bit incongruous because with APR, you're doing both screening and the work program implementation kind of in one fell swoop. Whereas this is a two-stage process where we're identifying issues at this stage, providing the opportunity for early feedback. But if this nomination is added to the work program for further review, that would be the time when we take a look at the impacts, look at the planning history, for example, and evaluate impacts as they are today. I just want to reiterate that, just so people know, yes, there was a nomination in the past, and we would take a look at that as a part of any planning study.
Next here in the chat, we've got Anya Giphart. Anya, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name there. But she says that there appears to be a contradiction between the plan and the fact that it will not affect the woods. I think this may have been answered in the previous comments, insofar as the existence of the conservation easement and the tree preservation requirements. We would be looking at those specific details, at time of in real detail at time of rezoning, and looking at the specific requirements that the county has for tree preservation and land development. And so, again, this is very high level. This is really only looking at what the proposed increase in residential intensity and whether or not that would be appropriate for this site. But certainly we will want to look at tree preservation and the conservation areas in greater detail if this does indeed move forward. Dan Field says, why does the land not fit the church's mission, and how does the sale of the 3+ acres fit its mission? I don't know, John, are you in a position to be able to answer that on behalf of the church, or you're probably most suited to know the church's mission?
Thank you. I can partially address it, and if I can, I'll turn it over to Reverend Christine Mendoza that's online with us. But I kind of go back to what I said in my remarks. This was purchased 25 years ago as a hedge for growth. At that time, the Braddock district, Braddock Road in this area was still growing quite a bit. Over the past 20 years, our demographics have changed. The amount of land available for housing use has decreased quite a bit. And it hasn't changed the mission of the church, it's changed how we might use that property. And as we go forward, since we have no thoughts of completing the additional phases on what's been approved, then it makes more sense to then put that excess property on the market and make it available to someone in the county to develop it. So Reverend Mendoza, Christine, if you've got anything to add.
Sure. Thank you, John. Hi, I'm the Reverend Christine Mendoza. I'm the rector of the Church of the Good Shepherd. And the issue of how does land not fit the church's mission is more that when it was purchased for a certain reason, and at a time in which all churches were growing. We've realized, and we've reached a different place now where we will not be needing this property. We won't be using it. It is, it's not part of the property in such a way that it's visually integrated in with the rest of the church. In fact, and I would be willing to bet that many of my parishioners don't even know that we own that property next door. And then in the largest sense, what we hope to do is to sell that property so we can reduce some of our mortgage from the building campaign that we had. And it set us on, in the future, on solid financial footing. As John said, we are not in financial trouble. However, we have land that we pay property taxes on and that we're not using that could help reduce some of our mortgage, that could help us in the future be better neighbors in our community.
That's great. Thank you, Christine. I'm going to pause from the chat here for a moment. I know that William Swightlick, I believe it is, he has had his hand up for some time. William, are you still here on the call?
Hi, yes, I am. And it's
Great.
William Swightlick.
Swightlick, I apologize.
Over by Robinson High School on Linfield Street. I have a question. I think it's most appropriate for Lynn Strobel, and that is, I reviewed the proposed comprehensive plan language that Supervisor Walkinshaw shared with us in one of his advisories. And upon looking at it, I noticed that the language was not specific to just the church property, to change it from R1 to R2 to 3. And it seemed like the language applied to the entire R1 parcels all the way up the Ollie Lane corridor. And if one looks at the zoning map at all the R1 parcels in the Ollie Lane corridor, all the way up to Athens Lane, there's about 40 additional R1 properties that this language potentially could apply to, which would then allow, if this language is approved beyond the church property, all those other 40 properties in the Long Branch Stream Valley to possibly consider higher, more dense land use residential up to 3 houses per acre. So Lynn, does this language that you're proposing for the comprehensive plan amendment apply only to the church property or to the entire Ollie Lane corridor and all the R1 properties in that corridor?
This was the comprehensive plan amendment that was submitted is only on the church property. It's only on the church property. And I don't know, Graham or Ryan, if you want to address that further.
I know
Yeah.
Graham had his hand up here, so I'll let him field this.
We're probably going to say the same thing, Ryan. Yeah, Mr. Sweet, like I think I haven't seen what you're looking at in particular, but my guess is that what you're looking at is the adopted comprehensive plan language, which does have a recommendation up the Ollie Lane corridor. So that is, if you're looking at it, that's probably the adopted comprehensive plan. What's in the plan today, which includes the Church of the Good Shepherd property in that recommendation. What this nomination would do is have a site-specific recommendation that's different from that corridor-wide recommendation. So to be clear, the nomination that we received and that we're reviewing is just for the Church of the Good Shepherd. It's not the entirety of the Ollie Lane corridor.
Lee, I've read Lynn Strobel's submission 2 or 3 times, and the way I read her paragraph with the proposed land use change, it applied, or at least it was unclear, that it applied all the way up to Athens, because she actually, in her paragraph language, used the extent all the way up the Ollie Lane corridor to Athens Road. It was not clear that the language she proposed applied only to the church property.
I was quoting in my letter land use recommendation 5, which I think Graham was also stating. I say land use recommendation 5, which states that the land in the Ollie Lane corridor. So I was quoting the plan, but the nominator proposes an amendment only on their property. The Fairfax County tax map reference up at the beginning of the letter is very specific to one parcel. The nominator is only the church. It does not apply to other parcels. So when I refer to the nominator, it's only the church.
Okay, Lynn, thank you very much. That clarifies things, the confusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to continue on with some of our folks here who have raised their hands and are wishing to speak. I see that next up in our queue is Elvira. Elvira, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Hello.
My name is Elvira Barracocha. I live at 4710 on Ollie Lane, and we have 1 acre property. And I have been a member of the Church of the Good Shepherd for over 20 years now. I support the church's mission, and I support the church's nomination to allow us to use the land in a way that is appropriate to the church's mission. As you know, things have changed, and the church is not just a physical place. We are more online than we are in the physical place. So to really serve the community and to really fulfill the church's mission, this would be the most sensible decision. And I think it will add value to our property too, in the sense of not only material, but also spiritual. So I think it's important to support this nomination. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Elvira. I appreciate your comments. Next on the line here, we have Chris Wade. Chris, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Hi,
So,
Chris.
thank you. Yeah. So first of all, John Morris, I really appreciate your words there and explaining the church's position. It did give me a different perspective. Having said that, I think that the argument that the surrounding properties or areas have high density, therefore you should allow it here, is actually an argument against this. You're just adding to the density in the area, and it would contribute to some of the issues that were raised 20 years ago. And I understand that you can't compare that plan to, or those concerns to today in terms of the process, but just on a high level, every bullet they listed exists today the same, if not more. And then lastly, I would say your answer regarding the wooded area is somewhat just disingenuous, because by line of sight, there is way more than 35 feet of woods there. So a significant portion of that wooded area would most likely be cleared. Now, I know you say it's part of the details of the plan, but I don't know how you develop houses there without clearing part of those woods based on what you presented. Now, there may be a buffer, and that buffer may be because of the conservation area, but it's still a pretty significant part of the overall property when you consider what's wooded there. So those are my comments more than anything. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know if either John or if Lynn would like to respond to that comment at all. But if not, we can move forward.
Yeah, this is John. I mean, there's, when you take that kind of an argument out to the extremes, there's nothing precluding us from cutting down some of those trees and forests as it is now, all the way down to the easement. So the easement is there for a purpose. We're abiding by the easement, and we will continue to abide by it. And then any future decisions the county wants to do can be either modified in the deed or added to the deed.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, John. Moving forward, I'm going to switch back over to the chat right now. I know we've got a few comments here that are piling up, but hopefully I will get us back to the place where we left off here.
And Ryan, before you do that,
yeah,
real quick to William, Elvira, and Chris, unless you have another comment or would like to provide another question or comment, if you could just click on the hand raise button one more time.
I got it. Thanks. Yeah, I got it. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Okay, so Stacy's question is, where exactly is the Dove property, and does it follow the current drive off of Ollie Lane and then swing behind the little white house that is already there? John or Lynn, would you be able to just clarify where the location of that is?
Sure, go ahead, John.
Yeah, essentially the address is 4925 Ollie Lane. Originally, when we bought it, it comprised approximately 2.3 acres, which was rectangular in shape, from the just north of the church entryway up to that tree buffer line to the residence next door, and rectangular all the way back to the neighborhood behind us. The 3 acres we're talking about is that 2.3 with a little extra addition added on to it to round it up and to include part of the property that we're not using at the church currently. So it's essentially 4925 Ollie Lane. The house sits in the middle of it.
Great, thank you, John. Next here in the queue we have Dan Field, who says that the church was not open in 2006 when it said it had no intention of developing the site if the plan was changed and the land was rezoned. And he goes on to say, then it's revealed upon questioning that the diocese owned the property, and so the promises to not develop were not meaningful. Does the diocese still own the property and support the amendment? What has changed to show that the church's activities are more transparent? John, I'll let you answer this one, although I will say that, from the county's process perspective, that the trustees have demonstrated to the county that they are the title owners of the property and that they've consented to the nomination. In this stage, we do take these at that value as part of the screening. But John, if you'd like to respond, just to answer Dan's questions that.
Yes, just real quickly, as you said, the trustees do have the authority to take possession of the property on behalf of the church and under the direction and auspices of the canons of the Episcopal Church. There's no question about that. And the comment about the church was not open in 2006, I'm not sure where that was coming from. The church was built in 1969. It was added on to in 2006, 2007, and the new building dedicated in 2007. We held services there every Sunday while the new building was being built. So I'm not sure what the basis of that kind of comment is.
Well, I'd like to explain then. This is Dan File. When I said open, I meant that telling the truth. They were claiming in 2006 that without the agreement of the diocese, that they would never develop the land. They somehow wanted the rezoning, well, first the plan change and then the rezoning, but they were trying to assure everyone at a public meeting that they really had no intention of ever developing it. But then when it was asked, do they own the land? They said, no, we don't, the diocese does. So then they were asked, well, how can you make a promise not to develop the land when you're not actually the owner? And there was no response to that. So when I'm saying open, it's about just that, telling the truth and making promises that are honest. And that was not the case 16, 17 years ago. And so it's a little disconcerting, to try to understand and believe what's said now.
Mr. File, I happened to be at that meeting that evening, for the Braddock district. And, the comments that were being said about the church at that time were very disingenuous and very hurtful. And they came from several of the residents there in that neighborhood. We were open as much as we could, and it may be your misunderstanding as to how the Episcopal Church property is, quote, owned. The trustees of the church are empowered by the canons of the Episcopal Church to act on its behalf with respect to property. So we act as the church's, for the benefit of the church, as empowered by the Diocese of Virginia. And I'm not quite sure how much more to try to amplify that other than to send you a copy of the canons and the applicable laws that state that. And the trustees, even though we change over time, we are empowered by the courts of the Fairfax County to act on the church's behalf. So it's about as open as we can be with it, and Reverend Mendoza can help step in.
Yeah. If I can just step in here. So I wasn't around then, so can't speak, and I won't try to speak to that conversation that happened at that time. But part of the confusion may come from the fact about this question about whether or not we could develop the property and whether or not that would require the diocese approval. The diocese would weigh in and need to approve any additional indebtedness. If we wanted to develop a property, thus take on another mortgage to do that, the diocese would have to approve that. So we do have this kind of interrelated financial relationship, but it's more about the church itself. The property itself is held in trust with the trustees. The diocese has been made aware that we are looking to subdivide this part of the parcel off. And so they are brought into that conversation. But at the time, if the question came up about, well, we won't develop because the diocese has to be a part of it, that would be a situation if we were to take on debt. They are then involved in that situation. And I don't know if that's helpful to you, Dan.
No, it explains what's going on now. I'm simply telling you that none of that was said as I remember the meeting that I was at. People do remember them differently, and I think we both have to allow for that. But I appreciate what you're trying to explain to us now. I oppose this development. I think that we're smarter than we were. Plans are important, and the county should stick with it. And I don't think anything about this proposal is all that different than what was proposed 16, 17 years ago. And it was rejected then, and I think it should be rejected again. Citing what's around you, Braddock Road just went through a whole process of trying to widen it, studying that. And in the end, they decided not to do it, mostly because people didn't want more traffic here, as I understood it. And this just brings more traffic, not, a ton, but more. And it's something that I, as a resident, I live on Hobart Court, I don't want it. And I want to go on the record.
So Dan, if I can ask you, because your question in the chat talks about what has changed to show that church's activities are more transparent. So at the heart of your concern, as I understand you saying, is that 16 years ago, you felt lied to. What can we do? What is it you need from us to show that the situation is different? How do we show that we're being transparent?
Well, you say this is part of your mission. I would think if you don't need the land and you want to, get it off the tax rolls, you could leave it at the current zoning, as one of my neighbors mentioned, and just sell it at that. And don't ask for additional rezoning. You got it at 1 unit per acre, sell it that way. And
well, at this moment, this course of action we're pursuing right now is not rezoning.
It leads to that, doesn't it?
It leads to rezoning. There's no guarantee that a rezoning would ever take place at this point. We are simply evaluating, the merits of this comprehensive plan nomination. It's very well possible that this may not move forward, and if it does, then at that point we would evaluate the merits of a rezoning. But at least for right now, we don't have a rezoning proposal in front of us, and so it would be premature to really delve into the details of that, or to try to make any assumptions on what might be in that proposal.
I was asked what would make me feel better. I'm telling the Reverend that I think it could meet some of the church's goals to not have to pay tax on that property anymore. And they'd certainly get some additional money from selling the property. It's worth more than what they paid for it, I'm sure, 16, I think it was, or whatever, years ago. But it doesn't have to get them as much as if more could be built on it.
And yes, Dan. And what I was asking was how we can satisfy your concerns about transparency.
Ryan, can I just, this is James Walker. I just want to,
absolutely.
We have a lot of questions that I can see, and just to respect everyone's opportunity to get their question, and maybe some of these there can be longer, certainly dialogues with folks in the community. I'm sure the church would be very open to that if we maybe take those offline and give other folks the opportunity to weigh in and share their questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, James. We'll go ahead and we'll keep going here. The next question we have is, did the Good Shepherd Church decide that their land would be a great opportunity to provide 8 homes, or is this a financial gain decision? I believe that's already been answered. And also we have from Jill and John Schaub, or is it Schaub, I believe? I apologize for the pronunciation there. But if it's, is there not a requirement to subdivide prior to the SSPA? And I know the requirement to subdivide would occur later on in the process. This is just simply looking at the comprehensive plan guidance, which really doesn't, there's not really a direct linkage between subdivision and the guidance in the comprehensive plan.
Hey, Ryan. This is Commissioner Cortina. I just want to clarify, to be completely direct on that question, you cannot rezone unless you have a plan amendment beforehand. You could not rezone to greater than what the plan calls for. So there is a cause and effect. You have to go through this stage before you can get to rezoning, just for clarity. Thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that, Mary. That is helpful because there is a process there, definitely. Moving forward, I believe many of these questions have already been answered, and so to the extent that they have, and knowing that we have others here in the queue, I'm not going to read all of these. But William Froelich says, is the nomination to change from an R1 to an R3, or just for 3 acres, or is it to change from R3 to is it to change to R3 for a 10-acre plat? No, the nomination is itself to move from a 1 dwelling unit per acre to a 2 to 3 dwelling unit acre per density. I think if we look at the nomination materials that were submitted, the effective density for the housing portion would be, I believe it's 2.5. I'll ask Lynn to confirm that, but I do want to just mention that this R1 to R3, this is a zoning designation. It's not a plan designation, and so when we refer to the plan designations, we're really talking about what the density of units are on the site, not whatever that might be contained in the zoning ordinance.
Ryan, this is Marcia. I think that question is whether it would just be for the 3 acres on the northern part or whether it would be for the whole parcel.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yes, I understand that now. Okay. And Lynn,
The
can you clarify
intent,
that for us, please?
I was going to say, I believe the intent of the church is that it would just be a rezoning on the 3 acres.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
But the plan amendment would be for the full property.
That's
correct?
right.
You're changing the plan.
That's right.
For the full property.
Okay, let's see. Just moving forward, I do see that we do have some comments here in the chat.
Sorry,
Just to allow
can I
participation. Yes.
Can I ask one question to follow up that? Why are we rezoning the entire property? Why would they want to rezone the entire property? I'm sorry, Lynn, I was just asking why the whole property wanted to be rezoned instead of just the parcel they're trying to.
I'm sorry, I said that they were only contemplating a rezoning of the 3 acres, not the entirety of the property.
Okay. Thank you. I misunderstood. Thank you.
Okay, we got some more comments here in the chat. Again, Jill and John Schaub say, but you can't get to a rezoning unless the plan is amended through the SSPA process, right? This is the first step. Yes, that's correct. As we mentioned earlier, this is, we have the screening process, and then, if this moves on to become a full-fledged plan amendment, then we would have that process, and then the rezoning process would follow after that.
But I want to make clear that the property could be developed under its existing zoning. So I agree with you. The rezoning would allow more residential development, but it would not preclude development of the site.
We have a question regarding, have you considered putting the property into a conservation easement? There may be tax benefits that are worth exploring. I can ask one of the representatives from the church to consider that, although this is kind of in line with the same rationale that they've already provided. I don't know if you've had anything else that you'd want to add there, either John or Christine or Lynn, as far as different options that have been explored.
I don't think that's consistent with what the church is proposing.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. We've got one more question here. The concept plan shows 8 single-family homes. How does this support a goal of affordable housing? Lynn, can you? I know that was a component that you had mentioned earlier on. Would you mind explaining that a little bit more in detail? please.
Well, I think that, and I'm not sure what the question is, when we went, if we were to go through a rezoning process, we would have to address the Fairfax County policies for affordable housing. And that would include a contribution to the Housing Trust Fund, because the property would not be greater than 50 homes. So it would, you know, we would be going through a proper system and making a contribution to the Housing Trust Fund.
Great, thank you, Lynn. And again, that would be farther on down the line in the rezoning
Correct.
process, not at this stage of the game. We do have about 8 minutes or so left before I'd like to move on to our other two nominations in the area. We have, let's see, Lauren and Daniel, are you still available? I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah. So we're actually one of the houses that butts right up to the area you're talking about building homes from what we saw online. And for us, our immediate thought is we bought our home knowing that was a wooded lot that wasn't going to have houses built on it. How are we supposed to be compensated for when we have people living there for years as renters, or we go to sell, it's now a house behind us, which it wasn't before. So that directly impacts us financially. And it's not something we're okay with at all.
Yeah, definitely, Lauren and Daniel. I can understand that concern. You know, at this stage in the game, we don't really get into to that level of property impact. However, I will state that, you know, if this does move forward into a more full-fledged plan amendment, we will be sure to do plenty of outreach with the community, plenty of engagement, and so we'll certainly have the opportunity to discuss, you know, those types of concerns in greater detail. You know,
Okay.
as this moves forward.
And just to clarify, there is an intent to sell to build homes, right? As of right now, all the documents that I'm reading do say that. So it's not like, oh, that's not what we're doing right now. That's clearly what has been put out publicly. That's not, oh, we're not at that point. That information has been provided. So that's 100% in my, at least from my understanding of the documents, the whole intent for the sale, correct?
I mean, that would be, you know, the church has an interest in selling that property, and in contemplating the sale, they have filed this comprehensive plan amendment.
Right. So
it is, the property is contemplated for sale.
It doesn't sound like it's maybe something that might happen. It sounds like that's the intent. That's what I'm just trying to clarify. As far as the documents I've read, it's not, we just want to sell the land. We can see what the offers are. There has already been a lot of legwork done for that to be sold and to justify why it should be single family homes to help with the housing shortage and this, that, and the other. But not that that's like a far-fetched idea. So I think it should just be stated very clearly, if we're talking about transparency, that yes, that is the actual true intent, nothing else.
Well, can I,
That's right.
may I speak? I mean, I can say from the church's position, our intention is to sell that plot of land. I can't, and I don't know what someone else will do with it. John,
Okay,
you're muted.
Just from the documents I'm saying, just from what we've read and seen, it says that.
Well, I mean, the property is zoned residential, it's not zoned commercial, so what, you know, the buyer would do with it would obviously be residential oriented.
Okay, so am I misunderstanding that it doesn't need to be rezoned for it to be residential?
It's already zoned residential.
Right, it is currently zoned residential for development up to 1 dwelling unit per acre. That is the zoning. So the property could be developed with up to 1 dwelling unit per acre.
But right now it's like one lot.
Correct,
No,
but
right now it's part of our lot.
No, I know, because the trees have fallen into our yard. So I know it's part of your lot. That's why I'm curious about what's going to happen with those other things too, because we have had things happen where we've had to have contact and get things done. But this is another whole aspect where you're talking about someone bought a house where it was never in anything that we saw ever going to change to a yard behind ours. And so that's just what I'm just trying to get clarity about what's going on, because it seems like there's confusion about what the intent is. Per the document, it sounds like the intent is to sell it to build homes, because those are slotted out in the documents that have been provided. I think, Ms. Strobel, your name was on those documents?
correct. I mean, that is the intent, is to sell it. It is zoned residentially, and I believe someone would buy it to construct residential homes. The church is not going to participate in building the homes. They plan to sell the property, but that is logically what would happen.
We just want to state as one of the residents who wouldn't just be in the neighborhood or experiencing traffic, as a lot that would literally back up to that we would be very opposed to it.
But the homes would be comparable to your homes.
There are no homes behind our house right now. That's the point. That is for us where we lose value. That's our impact. And that's why I was asking about how it would impact us, our neighbors, and the other houses who do not have any houses behind them and bought because that was the case.
No, Lauren, that is definitely a valid concern, and it's one that, you know, I think that we can continue to talk about, you know, offline if we need to. We could certainly, you know, I'm sure the church would be more than willing to engage in that as far as what some of their intent is and what they've stated. But I would like to move on because we are short on time now. But I believe next in our line we have Molly Lacey.
Well, thank you. I am a Braddock District resident. I live down Braddock off of Rolling and Burke Lake Road in a single family home. And the close-up problem is what you back up to. And the larger problem is one of our community. And as I'm sure nobody is ignorant of, that we have a huge and critical need for housing in Fairfax County, in Braddock District, and for affordable housing. Our young professionals and adults have been basically shut out of home ownership. So I certainly think that developing this land for more homes is the right step in the direction. But I also wonder how the land might be better used to support the need for a more inclusive community where people like our young teachers can actually become homeowners. People like that are completely shut out. And yes, 20 years ago, there was one thing, but at this point, things are really quite different. So I would welcome this kind of development in my neighborhood, should the land be available, James Walkinshaw. I really do understand the angst. I have a woods behind me, and the idea of having a house behind me is a bit disconcerting, but I know so many people who cannot afford to live where they grew up and went to public school and got jobs, and now they're living in the basement of their family's house. So I think it behooves us to think of the wider community other than just the people who live close. It's very rare to have a parcel of land that's on a bus, that's on public transit, and that is within walking distance of a shopping center. It's the perfect place. So I guess my question is how else might this land be used, perhaps a bit denser, to allow for some affordable homes on it, such as your neighbors at Fairfax Presbyterian. Thanks for letting me contribute.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate those comments. We have also behind Molly, we've got Scott Wilkie. Scott, are you still on the call?
And then I'll just mention, I'm just going to jump in here. After Scott, I think we will need to move on to the other nominations just in the interest of time. So I really appreciate everybody's discussion on this question, on this nomination, as well as on the others in the future. Thanks.
And again, it's not the end of the conversation. It's really only the beginning. But, you know, Scott, if you could just keep us on schedule here, how can we help you with your question?
I wanted to thank everybody for their time. I know it's late at night and this is, everybody's personal time. I just want to state that I am not in favor of this nomination. I live directly across the street from almost the entrance on Colbert Court. The amount of traffic on Ollie and at the intersection of Ollie and Braddock has gotten just so dense. All times of the day, there's no respite to it. We've just had the Woodley Chase Erickson Home Living property that's being developed up Braddock Road from us now, across from the cemetery, Fairfax Cemetery, Fairfax Memorial. There's just a lot of development right in a small area. And I just wanted to make it known that I do not support this at all. Thank you. Appreciate everybody's time.
Great. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate those comments. So at this time, we'll go ahead and we'll plan on moving on with the other two nominations. I certainly do want this again to be the start of the conversation rather than the end of it. If you have any questions, of course, my contact information is available on the SSPA website for anyone who wants to reach out. I'm available via email or by phone. And so certainly I'd be happy to continue the conversation with you, or at least, point you in the right direction to get the questions answered that you have. So just one moment here and I will bring up the slide deck for the next two applications. And for those of you here still on the call, I'd again like to just say thank you for your participation this evening. And it's been a good conversation. Okay, so moving on, we've shared our preliminary thoughts about this one. The next two nominations that we have are within the Fairfax Center area. The Fairfax Center area is, as I mentioned earlier, one of our development areas within the county. It's defined as a suburban center. You can see here how we have it's a suburban center with a core area surrounded by a non-core area and a suburban neighborhood around the periphery. The idea here is that this area that's in pink is around the Fairfax Government Center, Fairfax Corner, and the Fair Oaks Mall. This would develop at higher intensities of about 1.0 FAR to support future transit opportunities. And then the development intensities of this mixed-use area would then taper off to where we get around the periphery in yellow. These are more of the low-density residential neighborhoods within the area. The two applications that we're looking at this evening in this area, both are within this non-core area, and so we're not looking at what's been planned for the highest levels of intensity within the area. But the first one is at the corner of Waples Mill and Route 50, and then the second one is in the Fairfax Corner development. The first one at Waples Mill and Route 50, this is the Evergreen Investment Company. The site here, some of you may be familiar with where this is. This is the non-developed parcel in there in the southwestern quadrant of the intersection. It's about 2.1 acres. It's currently planned for at the baseline level of an office use up to 0.15 FAR. So it's a low intensity office. For the overlay district, it would be planned at a medium to high intensity office use up to 0.7 FAR. So, again, considering the FAR and what that means, we're still looking at a more of a medium, not extremely high intensity use for an office. There is plan language in this particular subunit J1 is the designation where part of this land unit would be used to accommodate a planned intersection at Waples Mill Road and Route 50, and that's in the transportation guidance. This nomination is proposing to add an option for residential use up to a 1.9 FAR. This would be processed concurrently with a rezoning application. And the idea here would be is that this would facilitate development of about a 200-unit multifamily residential building on the site. And just to give you an idea of what this might look like, according to the nomination, which I'll let Lynn talk about in greater detail here, you can see that this would be a building here on the intersection with some multifamily residences, about the same height or so as the surrounding office buildings, with a central courtyard and some other amenities and things of that nature on site. Like the other nomination, we've gone through a preliminary analysis. So far, we see that this nomination is within the Fairfax Center suburban area. It's in the non-core area. And so the core area itself is about 1 mile to the west, and that's planned for intensities ranging from about 0.35 to 1.0. And so this proposed 1.9 may not, looking at the level of intensity for this area, it's a bit higher intensity than what the surrounding area might be. And so we would want to look at the appropriateness of having something this intense outside of the core area. But we do find that it does support the countywide goals for increased housing within the activity center. This mid-rise is at a similar height to the surrounding office uses, as I mentioned. And if this moves forward, we'd want to look in closer detail about how this proposed development would interface with this planned interchange at Route 50 and Waples Mill Road. We'd also want to look at, we would also want to look at the provision of open spaces and recreational amenities. With this being a residential use that's it's kind of in a way surrounded by other office uses, the residents would need to have a greater need for those types of facilities and amenities on site. And then looking at overall with the site being where it is, having the adequate and safe site access is a comment that we have from the transportation department. With all of this in mind, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Lynn, I will let you take it away with your portion of the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. Again, my name is Lynn Strobel, and I represent the nominator. And I would like to introduce Kyle Price, who's on the line with us, and he is with Evergreen Investment Company. And he is interested in potentially developing the property that is the subject of the nomination. So if we go to the first slide. This is just an aerial view of the application property. As was mentioned, it's currently vacant. It's about 2.1 acres. It's right there at the corner of Route 50 and Waples Mill Road. It is commercially zoned. It is currently C8, and the surrounding area on this side of Route 50 is commercial. It is C8, C6, and I5, but you do see on the north side of Route 50, a housing development, Fairfax Ridge, is located in that area. So there are a mix of uses here. As was mentioned, this is in subunit J in the Fairfax Center area. So it's planned for office use up to a 0.7 FAR. Now, one of the concerns, and I know that everybody has been talking about this and has heard about the fact that office development is not something that is being proposed really at this time, other than maybe Tyson's, places along transit. But the office vacancy rate actually is very high in this area. We took a look at some of the office buildings around this, and vacancies are over 30%. And so we don't believe that office will be built on this site anytime soon. And I think that that has certainly part of what we're experiencing in today's market. And as a result of COVID, with more people working from home, it really has changed the office environment. And again, we don't believe this will be developed under the existing plan anytime soon. So if we go to the next slide, this gives a little bit of a flavor of existing conditions. The application property is on the right, but on the left, what you see across from the application property is a retail center. As I mentioned, also, it is proximate to office. This is also not too far from the Fairfax County Government Center. So we think that adding a residential building at this location really adds to the mix of uses, and those residents can be supported by the existing development that's in the area. So if we go to the next slide, this is the concept plan that we submitted with the nomination. The nomination would add an option for residential use. So the concept would be a multifamily building. It would be on top of structured parking that would be located underneath. This shows up to 200 units to complement, again, that existing mix of uses in the area. And staff had identified some concerns, which I think all can be addressed in going through a rezoning process. There was some discussion about open space. What we've shown on this plan is open space at the rear of the building, bringing it away from the busy roadway, but providing, a lot of green on this property. We think that we could work to, ensure safe access by providing interparcel access with the property that is next to us. And we also think that we could incorporate noise mitigation measures into the building design. So we think that there would be ways working through a rezoning process whereby we could address those concerns that were identified by staff. If we go to the next slide, this is just a conceptual view of how this would fit within the area in terms of height and mass and scale. What you're seeing there in kind of the center and the gray would be kind of an outline of the proposed building. And this building would provide a housing type that would contribute to the diversity of housing types in this area and also the price points in this area. It would address the county's need for affordable housing. It also has great access to Route 50, great access to Interstate 66, which is very proximate. And again, it would complement the uses that are already existing in the area. And if we go to the next slide, this just shows some different views of how this would fit in with the area. And again, address the need for housing in Fairfax County, consistent with its policies for mixed-use communities. I know that Evergreen would be interested in pursuing a rezoning of this property. They're ready to go ahead and begin that process so that we could, look at the plan amendment concurrently with the rezoning to address staff's concerns. So with that, Kyle, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think this makes a lot of sense in this location to add residential use. Kyle?
Not a whole lot to add on to. Just want to thank everybody for their time. Looking forward to progressing this, and we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Lynn. At this time, if there's anyone who would like to ask any questions, provide any comments, please feel free to use the chat box or raise your hand, and we will call on you to make a comment. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone that's immediately, providing any comments on this, but certainly, if we do have some comments, I see one here. We've got a Jean says, "Can you show the slide again that shows the extent of trees that are currently there?" I believe that was the overview slide.
The aerial?
Yeah, the aerial view. Yes.
Let's get back to that. There you go.
And then we have another question from Amy Gould, who asks, would this development be limited to affordable housing?
It wouldn't be, it would be a mix of affordable and market housing. We would be providing either workforce, probably workforce housing as a part of this development. And that's something that we would address through the proffer should we go through a rezoning process.
Just to clarify, this is a market rate project, and we would obviously adhere to whatever requirements that Lynn had alluded to.
Right.
Good, thank you both. Does anyone else have any comments while we're on this? If not, we can go ahead and move forward on to the next application. I see another one here from Jean. She says there was another slide showing more details of the trees. Is there a
maybe that first one with the street
maybe
view?
It was the first, yeah.
Oh, the existing conditions, maybe?
Can you see the slide?
Yeah, what I'm seeing on my end is the image of the existing conditions showing the property over to the right-hand side. Jean, I'm hoping that this answers your question for what you were looking for. We have this as well as the aerial view of the property, which kind of gives a sense of what the current character of the property is. And she says, yes, I'm assuming that they would mostly come down. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Glenn, this is Mary Cortina. I have a question. for you or for Kyle. Knowing the surrounding densities in the plan, how did you come up with this FAR?
I think, Kyle, that you were looking for a building that would fit within what was around it. You know, the building next to this is fairly significant. And I think that you were trying to design something that would be consistent with surrounding development. I think you were also considering construction type, and also how many units you needed to make this work. So Kyle, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Lynn said, I mean, it's kind of multiple things. As she said, it's kind of trying to stay as much as we could in line with the buildings around the area, but also, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but at some point, you need to hit a certain unit count in order for, a real estate project to be feasible in terms of construction efficiencies and operating efficiencies to actually operate the building. And 200 units is really like on the lower end, if I'm being totally honest. But that's kind of the quick synopsis. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Unless there are any questions on this one, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we move on to the next submission. With that in mind, we can go ahead and move forward and perhaps use the next 10 minutes or so that we have left allotted to us to focus on that one. Of course, if there's anyone having questions on the line, I'm more than happy to take them offline outside of this meeting as well. But let's go ahead and move back to our slide presentation. And our next application is here in the Fairfax Corner area. This is you can see here on the aerial imagery where the government center property is, just to the south. This is on 45.35 acres in the Fairfax Center area. Again, this is subunit I1. The current plan is for residential use at about 8 to 12 dwelling units per acre. The base of which is a 4 dwelling units per acre. And then at the overlay level, this is an office mixed use at 0.35 FAR planned as part of the adjacent Fairfax Corner development, which is a mixed use development model. Within the comprehensive plan, this does acknowledge that this is the reserve at Fairfax Ridge, developed with approximately 650 units. For this nomination, it's proposed that the residential use would continue on the site, although this would be an increase to 0.42 FAR, which would accommodate a new multifamily building with 405 units, representing a net increase of 335 units from what is already on site. So we seem to have a blank slide here. I apologize for that, but we will talk about the concept here shortly about what this looks like. Some of the preliminary staff considerations is, even though this is outside of the core area, it is still buffered by the core area, that land unit A1, B1, B2 that you see there in this graphic to the west, that is all part of the core area. And so having this site included in the Fairfax Center area study phase 3, which is ongoing right now, we may see some benefits in evaluating this alongside other nominations within the core area where the phase 3 study is the focus. There are some opportunities to enhance the multimodal connections, integrated recreation and open spaces within the reserve site. These are all the types of elements that we would see at a site, of this nature with other mixed uses nearby and within the proximity of the core. So maintaining that overall character within the area would be something we would want to look at. And then with that in mind, though, some of the site conditions may present some challenges to ensuring that the amenities can measure with these greater densities as the plan already recommends. We have some retaining walls, we have some site topography and things like that. And so we would want to look at what is actually feasible for this particular site in light of what is already in the adopted area-wide guidance, which if this goes forward, that area-wide guidance would not be proposed for amendment. We would be looking specifically at this site-specific increase to the residential density. So again, following our little model here, I'm going to turn this back over to Lynn to discuss the details of this particular nomination. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan. Excuse me. And I would like to introduce Aubrey Fenton and also Shelton Whitley. They're both on the line with EQR, and I will recognize them at the end and see if they want to provide any additional comments after I make my presentation. As was mentioned, the nomination property is located within Fairfax Corner. That's part of an overall land unit that's over 114 acres, planned for an overall 0.35 FAR. As was mentioned, there is specific plan language for this portion, which is located in land unit I of the plan. And I'm just going to read this. It says that the subunit is planned for office mixed-use development at an intensity of a 0.35 FAR at the overlay level, subject to conditions located as outlined in subunit B1. But for subunit I1, where the nomination property is located, states is developed with multifamily residential uses at the reserve at Fairfax Corner, which contains approximately 650 garden apartments. So the plan language is very specific to that existing development. And as was mentioned, it is located in a non-core area. So if we could go to the next slide. So as part of Fairfax Corner, it was included within a development plan, and that's kind of what you're seeing here, is that there were a number of different land bays that were approved together with Fairfax Corner. This particular property, and not to confuse the comprehensive plan with the zoning, but on the zoning plan, it's shown as Land Bay D, and that's what you're seeing down there at the bottom of the page. So while Land Bay D is developed, I think what we need to recognize is that Fairfax Corner is largely developed, but it does keep evolving. Right now you'll see at the top left that there is a commuter parking garage that is under construction. There also is additional residential development that is under construction. And so the owner of the reserve at Fairfax Corner believes that that existing use should also continue to evolve and meet the needs of the county. And we can go to the next slide. So Land Bay D, which is the nomination property, is about 47.88 acres. It is developed with 652 garden-style apartments that were built in 2001. And what the nomination envisions is a proposal that would remove up to 70 units and add up to 405 units in a multifamily building. So there would be a net increase of about 335 units. The FAR would increase slightly. It would go from a 0.35 to 0.42. However, we think that that is a reasonable transition from the core, which is 1.0, to the non-core area. So we think this is a transitional area. And I want to point out the section that's at the bottom of this slide. And what I think you're seeing there is that because of the topography, the proposed building is going to be compatible in height to what surrounds it. What you see on the right of that section is the existing development. On the left is Fairfax Corner, but it would be compatible in the way of development. And I think that that's also shown with the next slide, which we put together to kind of show a perspective scale and mass of, what this might look like. And you'll see that it would fit in with what's there. And it would create housing opportunities within walking distance of public transit. It would also diversify the housing stock in this area. Another benefit is that this is proximate to employment opportunities. You have the government center that's not far away. You've got all the, the retail at Fairfax Corner, and you have the Fair Oaks Mall. And all of that creates employment opportunities, but also retail services that would support this additional residential component. And if we go to the last slide, there's some precedent images that just kind of show how this would be a quality development that would fit in with the character of the area. Again, we believe that this nomination would address the need for housing in Fairfax County. It is in a great location to do that. And I think that the nominator is ready to go ahead and prepare a rezoning application. They are ready to proceed, and they would be able to, process a proposal concurrently with the nomination should it go forward. So with that, I will ask Aubrey, maybe if she would have any further comments before it's opened up for questions.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm actually going to hand it off to my team member, Shelton.
Okay, very good. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, you're fine, Lynn. Yeah, we would just reiterate that we believe our proposal aligns pretty well with the county's goal of increasing the residential density and, these walkable areas and will help reinforce the vitality of the Fairfax Corner mixed-use development. And like you said, we look forward to moving forward with an application, with the county's blessing.
Thank you, Shelton. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone. We do have one question so far in the chat. We've got from Keith, who is a member of our Braddock Land Use and Environment Committee. He asked that this section presented appears to create a looming of the existing residences. What is the difference in height between the proposed building and the existing housing? You may have mentioned this earlier, Lynn or Shelton, but do you have that height available?
Kelly, do you want to show the that section again that clarifies the heights? Yeah, I think this is a good one. So you can see here that the building is proposed to be up to, I think, 6 stories. And you can see if you look to the right, that's a sample of the existing structure, which is 4-ish stories. It's a little complicated by the change in grades, but that's the most simple answer.
Kelly, just for those that are watching this on smaller screens, would it be possible to zoom in a little bit on the section?
Yes, let me get out of the bigger view.
For those of us watching along here on our screens, we're referring to the cutaway diagram here on the bottom of the graphic that Kelly is bringing up for us.
That's great.
Is that better, Graham?
Yeah, that's good.
There we go.
Perfect.
And so you see here, there's the Kelly, if I'm interpreting this correctly for everyone, we have the existing building on the left-hand side. The proposed building is in the middle, and then the existing garden-style apartments are there on the right-hand side.
Correct. I believe this is the Camden.
Yeah, that's Fairfax Corner.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Fairfax Corner, the proposal in the center, and then the existing community that this would be part of, the reserve at Fairfax Corner.
Yep.
It looks like both Amy and Keith have similar questions here as far as is there parking, and
yes.
Where's the parking located? I believe it's there.
It would be underneath the building. That's right. The 2 lowest levels are shown as parking.
Well, as a further point of clarification, this building has not been designed yet. It's conceptual. This is shown for scale, pretty much scale only. The application was filed as up to 405 units, as we're still not sure what the appropriate number will be.
And just to clarify as well, that has an impact on the parking. So if we pursued a lower intensity concept that weren't as tall, the parking structure might be different. So instead of parking on top, like a podium style structure, which is what you see here, and the highest density idea that could be implemented if this application or nomination continues through the process. Another way that that could be implemented is with a structured parking garage that's made out of precast.
And I saw one question in the chat from Amy about the affordable housing ratio. I'll just note the county policy for workforce dwelling units is the thing that would most likely be applied here. That's a comprehensive plan policy, and it recommends different ratios depending on whether this is a rental development or for sale. If it's rental, the WDU policy would recommend 8% of the total units be made available to people making 80% of the area median income and below. There's some specific tiering in there for 70 and 60% AMI households as well. And then the for sale, if it is a for sale, that the total amount is higher, but so are the AMI. So it goes up to 12% AMI with tiers for 120% AMI, 100% AMI, and 80% AMI, I believe. So depends on whether it's a rental or a for sale.
And I will just mention now that we are just after our 9 p.m. Time, but if there are any more comments, I'd be more than happy. If anyone would like to either utilize the chat or raise your hand, we'd be happy to take any final comments on this one. Keith says, does that 12% still include 8% for the 80% AMI?
That's kind of mixing apples and oranges, I think, Graham.
Yeah, Keith, I'll send you the thing. The other thing to note is that the board is actually looking at the for sale rates. And so that's something to know. Your countywide policy on for sale is something that's going to be taken a look, that they'll be taking a look at. The exact ratio right now is 12% and it's structured, I believe, I'll double check this before we hop off the call. I believe it's at 4% at 80, 4% at 100, and 4% at 120 to total 12%. But I'll double check on that, Keith, right now, just to make sure.
I'll put the information up here on the screen as we close, but we had a question of where we can send comments, and I've put my email address in the chat here. So you'll have that in the chat as well as in the slide here that I'll show shortly. We have another question.
Ryan?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying we have another question here, also on an administrative matter. Will a transcript and recording be provided for the meeting, and how do we obtain a copy? Yes, that the meeting recording is going to be posted to our SSPA website, and it will be available. It's streamed off of YouTube, and so you should be able to access that. As far as a time frame, I would imagine that would be in the next week or so that we'd be able to get that up. But certainly
We'll have it
this
up by
meeting
Thursday,
and all of the
most
others
likely.
will be available. So yeah, it's going to be posted once we have that.
Ryan, my question goes to the outreach in the reserve community. Did the information just go to the ownership, or did it go to the residents who live there?
That's a good question. I know that we followed our typical notification for the way in which we've done all of these nominations throughout the district. Graham, can you I don't recall.
Yeah.
I seem to recall it was both the owners and the renters. But
owners and renters. That's correct. Owners and renters were those that were notified.
So would the people throughout that community have been notified? It would be sent to residents, or just the people affected by this building?
Sure, I can double check in the roles to make sure, but it should have gone out to everybody in the community. What we typically do is we draw a radius 300 feet around the property and send it to owners and renters within that radius, but we can double check and make sure.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. Keith asked by what means were they notified? This was we used a mailing flyer that we sent out to the adjacent property owners and renters, as we did with all of the different SSPA nominations. But in addition to that, we've also had postings for each of these meetings through the supervisors' newsletters, through our social media and other ways in which we promulgate meeting announcements and things like that. So we typically use the same general process that we've used for all of our plan amendments and all of our things, but With that in mind, if this moves forward, we're certainly going to be doing more community engagement. We're going to be really making more of a targeted effort to get the people in the room who need to be in the room. But I know that you've noted here that the whole development should be notified, even if they fall outside of 300 feet. Yes, and we will double check on that. I certainly agree with that. One thing that's unique about this development is that all of the units within the development are actually on the same parcel according to the tax records, and so it is very likely that we did notify the whole development for that because it's all in the same record. But we can confirm that for you, Keith, and we'll let you know exactly where that went. So with that in mind, if there are no more questions on this proposal, I'll go ahead and we can go ahead and close out the meeting. The last slide I have here is just an acknowledgement that we do want to, of course, thank you for your time and attention throughout this whole process. I think we've had some very good conversations, some very good feedback on these 3 nominations here in the Braddock district. Some of the reminders of what's coming up here in the next few weeks. We have some dates for the Planning Commission workshops. As I mentioned earlier, these might shift, but this is what's on the agenda for right now. And during these, we'll take the results of all of the different nominations, the feedback that we've gained from the community, some of the work that staff has done as far as identifying those initial concerns. And these Planning Commission workshops are really to help prioritize and to help develop a recommendation that would be presented to the Board of Supervisors at a later date. If you have any questions, any comments, anything that you would have wanted to have said tonight that you were not comfortable saying in front of a larger audience, please feel free to contact me. My contact information is here. Email or phone is best, and then that way, I look forward to hearing from you. We can continue the conversation, and if I can't answer a question for you, I can certainly point you in the right direction, and we can get an answer for you on that. So. With that in mind, again, I'd like to just say thank you. Appreciate your time tonight. I know that we did go a little bit over time, and I apologize for that, but I do hope that the time that we've spent together has been helpful and useful. And with that, I'll go ahead and close the meeting, and I look forward to hearing from you if you have anything else for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you,
Really appreciate it.
everyone. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Supervisor Walkinshaw.